You know, one of the things I'm very aware of. Actually, I was aware of this when I was a little child. Is what we call competing for information on what we know, what we believe is true. Because we all have a microphone, right? Mob rules, all that stuff, right? Because obviously, when I was a small child, and I'm androgynous, and I'm experiencing perfect balance, and I'm in a state of peace always, right? But then I realized at such a young age that I'm experiencing, if you will, the loss of voltage, and not just bipeds. I've mentioned this before, but everything. Because you realize that when you're anchored to the magnetosphere of a planet and everything that is connected, everything that is alive and living in nature at every cellular and molecular level. And of course, I explain this about any loss of voltage I experience in anything, a mineral, a tree, a plant, a seed, anything. That's how hypersensitive my energy field is, my antenna. Okay. And so I was just watching this guy that was talking about a neuroscientist. Okay, so because I spent time going through the academic community, right, of how they compartmentalize everything, right? Much like I talked about how the corporate military stuff, getting a security clearance. You don't know what they're doing over in one building, right? But you know that universities and scientists that are doing research with the labs, right? Like anybody that's been to college and you're going to get a bachelor's degree and you're going to take a science class, there's usually a lecture side, which is the book side, right? And then you go into a lab. So you take what you learn in theory and then you apply it to lab, which is learn by doing, which is like voc ed, right? Which is simulating. Okay, so you're simulating what you're learning. And so then you have, if you wanted to measure this over time, you'd have like what they were doing in biology courses, say 200 years ago in classrooms or 100 years ago, and what they're doing today. And then you realize that they've gone into these little highly focused little compartments. Now, for example, you take organic chemistry or biology, and now they have all these little speciations. Now you can expand the consciousness out on this from the smallest to the largest, from small molecules of particles of consciousness energy, and say, okay, let's just take the field, for example, of neuroscience, right? Now, when I grew up as a kid, for example, I was sent to a neuroscience to figure out why it is that I was getting grades that were low, but it showed that I had ability to get higher grades in other subject matters, right? And and part of that dealt with the fact that it was reported to my parents through the folks at schools about your child is hyper, okay? And so if you understand how that is with the expansion of energy and the accelerating of the primal sound and light field stuff, they don't want to know that, right? And so when you're frequency modulating, when you know that you're 4 years of age in a spiritual battlefield in a fallen system, which is an energy war, and you realize who's who, right? You don't want to sort of generically, in the way that the military intelligence, when you've landed behind enemy-held lines, want to get captured. Remember, when you're in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? I'm just another dummy running around here, running a program just like the rest of you, right? Because of the way that the tracking surveillance is between being inside time, outside time, or running a stealth code as guardian level stuff for the work that we do as a Manu, right? On behalf of the founder race, the guardian races, okay? And so when I saw this little video that was put up here, this guy talking about a neuroscience, I thought, okay, here, because I've worked with so many different people in the academic arena, the Roman arena, about an individual will go to school and follow the programming to go from, say, one class to another class to another class, and putting all their energy in learning all this science is being put forth by all these folks, which is really a club. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know this unless you've taken time to look over time the curriculum or the material, the reality programming material, the codes of how realities are changed from, say, one generation to the next. And those are like directing consciousness, energy, in order to experience the reality fields that they experience in the future. Future proves past, back to the future. Right? So I'm picturing in my mind this lady who's a neuroscience, because now this guy is parroting what the neuroscience is saying about having negative thoughts, right? And so he was explaining on behalf of what he's learned through her, for example, what happens when you have a negative thought, right? And so he was saying about how there's a 90-second buffer when hormones are being released as a stress response, or which is really a reaction state between two magnets, but they don't use that terminology. Okay, they're not going to come right out and sort of just put it in a nice little paragraph and say that, you know, we're connected to everything on the planet between two magnets. One's negative, one's positive. Okay, so we got positive bloodlines here, we got negative bloodlines here. 13 and 13, which is 26, which is 8. Okay, so when we're connected to them and they're connected to us, that's not how it's explained. So what it's like, cut right to the chase, right? Blood and water, water's memory, right? Now we're back into future proves past, or if you will, future events, present events, past events. What it's like to be held captive to memory programming. Things that are held in memory that's yet to be healed, yet to be cleared. They don't cover that. So they're willing to sort of give you a tidbit of causation. But what happens is you have a state of consciousness that's running on a memory bank, that's putting all of this energy to put in memory what it's learning through their schools, and then they spit out what they've learned through their research, right, without explaining the whole picture, when the whole picture can be explained in one paragraph. Now we're back to time and energy. What we learn, how fast we're learning. Now we're into the acceleration of a tetrahedron, a magnet. Right? So they got no problem with these folks going into these schools, right, running occupation codes to be part of their corporate empire. And then they'll regurgitate out back what they've learned in order to do what? Describe causation. Right? It's not that the information might not be useful to understand, oh, now I know how it works. Right? So I have fun with this, but time and energy, right? Energy is numbers. Numbers is money, right? Because I'm sure this neuroscience is probably living in a nice home, has a nice bank account. Now we're into biometric accounts. Now we're into what I mentioned in a previous video about when you see some of the stuff that Glenn Beck has been highlighting about a corporate lawyer that made a fortune as a result of following the orders, following the rules, going into school and staying within that paradigm. Operating, running a software operating system, operating in that environment to be a part of what that environment does. Okay, so I know because I worked with so many of these folks that they don't want you to deviate from the programming. You know, like you've decided that, hey, I've found a whole lot of things out, much like, what's his name, Bruce Lipton, who was a professor that was teaching, as I remember, microbiology at the University of, Wisconsin, I believe it was, medical school, teaching doctors about microbiology. And he began finding out, because of doing research with stem cells. And then all of a sudden he went, we use these words to sort of describe how they work. He went rogue. Now he's not following the script, right? Now he's independent. Now that he's independent, he's not held captive by the leash. The leash is the corporate umbrella stand, right? The Babylonian Vatican priesthood. Babylon. Remember, go back in history to the 408 AD when the native indigenous folks of the planet defeated the Illuminati bloodlines, is really what it boils down to, and got their titles stripped away. And that's why Karen Ann Luke MacDonald, White Bear Clan mother, 13th Arcturian White Bear Clan mother, issued the documents to the International Court, right, to say, go home. Okay, so that's a lot of folks. Which basically, you've been stripped. You have no power to operate here anymore. So when you begin to realize the associations, in blood banks and lines of communication between software operating systems, everybody that's here at this planet, you realize how many Star Nation races that actually represents, that collaborate with each other as formations of consciousness that form alliances in order to do what? Control energy, which is to control consciousness. Okay? So everybody's got a piece of the action, whether you're in Andromedan, whether you're from Sirius, whether you're from Lyra, whether you're Arcturian, right? Any other galaxy. Why there's an intergalactic council. Why there's the Founders, Council of 5, right? So there's a much bigger picture here. And I'm so happy to see that it's all getting full exposure. Just like Glennis Beck video that I mentioned yesterday, it's getting full exposure, right? Because this is another day between yesterday and today here on the Big Island. It's been running pretty hot, and one of the ways you can tell is when my face feels hot, particularly around here, and then within a day or two, when it sort of settles down a little bit, it starts chunking off, peels off. So I use normally aloe vera to sort of cool things down, or turmeric and honey, which is good for that, right? And so this morning when I got up, I'm usually up on my feet and around. No, I went back to bed. That's processing a lot of energy that's coming in right now, and I'm hearing the air compressor, in the echo chamber of the planet, hissing, right? Ever been inside of a big factory that are running a gazillion pneumatic air tools? Pressure washer, PSI, right? Yeah, so the incremental changes, right? So the wabbit with the clock was reset, right? Yeah, so anyway, I get a kick out of some of this stuff, but it's not really funny when you put it in the larger construct from an informational point of view, really, about people sharing information and how that information is connected to other information, and how it just sort of becomes an exercise in futility when you're trying to compete over what you know and what you don't know. What library you're running on and the library somebody else is running on. Hey, you're running on a different library, and that's cool, right? I might have something to learn from you, right? Learning through each other's who we all are together, the direction that we're all going in, right? So that we can all live in a state of peace, love, harmony, and balance with the cosmos, right? The Founders. The folks that created the first universal and galactic temple. What do you think? Sound like a good idea? Basic logic, right? Log in, log out. Logic. The math doesn't lie. Have a great day. Be good to yourselves.